Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Umberto Mecchi. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Hostplus, and it gives me, it's a great privilege to be here today to chair and moderate this session, expressing your voice, your brand through voice. But before I do that, I was just wondering if you could indulge me for a short moment for an important point. At Cmsf each year, we hold a charity raffle at the conference dinner in aid of the National Breast Cancer Foundation and the Prostate Cancer Foundation. This year the raffle has gone digital. That means no more paper tickets, searching for cash in your wallet at the dinner. So it also means tickets are now on sale via the raffle tab in the app. So don't wait until the dinner to make your purchase. It's a secure payment gateway and government certified prize drawing facility. Your digital tickets will be sent directly to your email. So please be aware there'll be no cash sales on the night of the dinner. If you must pay by cash, there is a raffle help desk in the Cmsf Central. And our prize sponsors have kindly donated over $18,000 worth of prizes. So please give generously and don't forget to pick up your I Donated badge from the AIST booth once you've purchased your tickets. So thank you for your attention on that matter. Okay, now to the session at hand. There is no denying that this is an incredibly exciting time as we are on the cusp of the next major wave of transformative digital services that will reshape the possibilities of how we have conversations with our members. We are already seeing the integration of smart digital technology into many inanimate objects, devices and machines, whether it's chatbots or voice services like Alexa. But just like the previous two waves, the desktop web in the 1990s and mobile in the 2000s, this will be truly transformative for business and society alike. Some call it the Internet of Things, but according to a report by Fjord titled The Era of Living Services, it predicts that over the next 5 years, sensors, the cloud, connected smart devices and real-time analytics will combine to deliver a new layer of connected intelligence that will revolutionise the ability of brands and organisations to offer interesting and increasingly indispensable digital services to consumers. A defining characteristic of living services is that they will be designed around the needs of individuals as opposed to generic services defined by an organisation for mass consumption. And these living services will profoundly affect brands. And the existential question of how brand personality is communicated through these exchanges and conversations will be a challenge that marketers will be dealing with for years to come. Companies not only have the opportunity to become more human and responsive in real time, but conversational and compassionate interactions will become an expected part of the customer's journey. Brands prepared to answer this challenge can weave brand voice and identity to create meaningful customer interactions. Those unprepared risk appearing robotic and tone deaf and may be left out of the conversation entirely. Today, we will endeavour to unpack all of this with a focus on voice and chat services with an esteemed and impressive panel of thought leaders within this distinguished field of expertise. But before I introduce the panel, some standard housekeeping and audience engagement. Before we get into it, there's going to be a polling question, and if you can delve into your app, the polling question, which is to be displayed on the screen, it asks, which do you think will become more important in delivering customer experience? The answer options are 1, chat, 2, voice, or 3, both. So while you're responding to that question, let me introduce this esteemed panel. To my right, I have Bronwyn van der Merwe. My name's Umberto Mecchi. I'm allowed to get it wrong, right? A lot of people get my name wrong, so apologies, Bronwyn. But as the General Manager of Fjord across Asia Pacific, Bronwyn works with clients to transform their business to take advantage of digital and become more customer-centric. Bronwyn, we're privileged to have Bronwyn today as she's regularly sought out as a thought leader and spokesperson for Fjord in Australia, with numerous press publications and interviews in Business Spectator, Marketing Magazine, CMO and ABC Online, as well as speaking turns at events such as UX Australia, CDO Summit and Vivid. So please join me in welcoming Bronwyn.
Thank you.
To my left, I have Suzie Shaw, who is the Managing Director of the social-led agency We Are Social, heading up its 40-strong Australian team. She joined the company in mid-2015 following a 20-plus year career in advertising, working both in London and Sydney. And she's worked on brands including Netflix, Coca-Cola, CommBank, Air New Zealand and BBC. And Suzie has led social and digital projects to build communities, to develop consumer insight and build customer advocacy. So please join me in welcoming Suzie. To my far right, we have Mitchell Long, and Mitchell is known as the fastest promoted strategy director in the history of PhD's global network. To date, he has led strategy for some of the world's biggest brands, including Google, Unilever and GSK. In addition to more than 20 industry awards, Mitch recently won Ad News 2017 Media Campaign of the Year for his work marketing the Google app through an innovative partnership with The Voice in Australia. So please join me in welcoming Mitch. And last but not least, on my far left here, we have Dave Flanagan, who is the Head of Digital Solutions at The Works and sister agency On Message, with a background in marketing and technology, and more recently specialising in chatbots and AI. Dave believes that brands and businesses need to embrace the new world of conversational commerce, and we'll hear a little bit more about that. On Message is Australia's first messenger specialty agency, and delivering chatbots for clients such as Facebook, Foxtel, ING Direct and Optus, and I'm sure he's got some great examples to share with us today. So please join me in welcoming Dave. So let's have a look at the results before we get into it. So both, that's really interesting. So maybe the panel can use that as a bit of context as part of the discussion. So what I'll do first, I'll turn to each speaker and give them a few minutes, because there's a lot to unpack here, and there's a lot of conversation to have around these emerging technologies, particularly voice and chat. So I might start with you, Bronwyn, if that's okay. And maybe if I can ask you the question, I'll have a discussion around what is voice and why it's important for business and marketers, and perhaps looking at it through the lens of where we are now and what does the future look like.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So voice is really a natural evolution of the way that we engage with brands and with computers. So we've always tried to engage with computers. We started with the command line and went to graphical user interfaces. It evolved into touch, and now we've moved into voice. And with each sort of leap forward, it's basically a reduction of the level of abstraction between the computer and the human, making it much more effortless and intuitive and frictionless. So it's this very natural evolution of the way that we interact with services. And that's part of a bigger trend, which Umberto talked about, which is this move towards the era of living services. So living services are, very simply put, they are a service that evolves in real time, changes based on the customer, based on what they're doing, their context, on the data analytics that we have around them, so that they are very personalised and very intuitive. And what's interesting about living services is that they're quite atomised into the environment. So we used to have the desktop where we'd sort of sit there, and then we had the rise of mobility. With these living services, they're sort of everywhere, all around us, in built environments as well as in digital environments. So a really good example of a living service is Google Now. So Google, you may have noticed sometimes that when you go to a pub, you get a little notification on your phone telling you how long it's going to take you to get there. You've got that? So you've never asked for that, but Google is using the data that it has about you to know what you're doing, what you're about to do, and to predict what you're doing and give you a little bit of information. So the other day, I was going to go and meet some friends at a bar, and it told me that it was going to take me 7 minutes to get there. And so I set off, and then it sent me another message, another notification, proactively, to tell me that the bar that I was going to was now shut. So it's that kind of level of anticipation and proactivity that these living services have based on this data and analytics. So living services has come about because of two market forces. So the first is the digitization of everything. All of these technologies that are now available at a very cheap price point, whether that's like cloud computing or 4G or artificial intelligence, organizations are now able to use these. But the other thing is this rise in customer expectations. So we talk about customer expectations being liquid across industry boundaries. So it's no longer enough to look at what is happening with other super funds or other financial services, because customers' expectations are now being set by the very best of breed experiences that they're having with brands across categories. So this sort of market force of rising customer expectations and the digitization of everything is enabling and making all organizations need, in order to remain relevant, they have to be able to build these living services. So part of this is also that with these living services, everything becomes very merged in terms of physical and digital. And we're seeing this in all environments. For example, in retail, I'm sure all of you have heard about Amazon Go in Seattle, which is the new retail environment store where you sort of walk in, you do your shopping, and you walk out. And some of our employees went there and when opened, and they sort of gave us some notes about all the experience, and they tried everything to trick it. They had picking up products and putting them behind their backs and swapping them, but all of this technology is up in the roof, completely invisible. Sensors, there's things in the floor to measure your weight. There's RFID and payments and all these kind of things. And what was really interesting is that they said the experience was so good, it was actually boring. But the other thing that they said was they're really worried that they are now going to walk out of other shops without paying for things, just like I'm sure other people have done when you get out of a taxi. So this customer expectations, they set very quickly. So you're seeing it in retail, digital and physical coming together with all of these technologies. We're also seeing it in cars, where voice is very soon going to become the dominant way of interacting with machines. In fact, we just saw that at CES, Toyota has announced that it is going to put Alexa into all of its cars. And then, of course, the major battleground is people's homes. So you have two very dominant brands, Amazon's Alexa and Google at Home. And in America, we've seen that by 2020, it was only launched in 2017, but by 2020, they're estimating that 75% of homes will have a smart speaker in them. So the takeoff has been very, very rapid. And we're seeing that 70% of those are Alexa and about 20% are Google at Home. But also what Alexa is doing, very interestingly, is diversifying very quickly. It's got about 50 different products. And it's a very open platform. So it's going to be interesting talking to other panelists here about the Google versus Amazon, but certainly it's here and it's now, and it's very, very rapid. So my colleague in America was telling me a funny story about his son who walked in on a Saturday morning and said to Alexa, "Alexa, can you add 2 AA batteries to the shopping list?" and walked out. And what was interesting about this story is that, first of all, he did not find that remarkable at all, that a 7-year-old is shopping in the home and finding that completely natural and normal to do. But secondly, he didn't ask for a choice of brand, and nor did Alexa offer a choice. And thirdly, I'm sure you can all imagine what was delivered the next day, but it was Amazon's own brand, batteries. And we've sort of been doing a little bit of digging into this. And what's fascinating is that over the last year, Alexa's own brand batteries have grown in sales by 93%. And in fact, now 94% of all batteries sold through Amazon are its own brand. So, these algorithms that are sitting inside of these voice personal assistants are a new gateway between consumers and brands, and this is going to be the big challenge for all of us and all of you as we go about thinking about how to connect with our customers. All of the effort that we put into marketing, to identities, to communications has gone. I mean, the Duracell bunny is as good as dead.
That's fantastic. So I guess with that context, Suzie, I might turn to you. Obviously, Bronwyn's presented a pretty exciting, but at the same time pretty scary case for marketers. And I just wondered if you could probably touch on, or balance out what you think the opportunities and risks are for funds, with a particular focus on how voice may redefine our brand and strategy efforts. Thinking about category versus brand considerations. I thought your battery one was a good one there. And the other thing is why customer-led design and customer experience is important within this context.
Yep. There's a lot there, so
I'll
try and
please.
unpack it one by one. First up, I think Bronwyn has touched on a lot of the issues that marketers really need to be thinking about. Number one, customers are increasingly going to be shopping category rather than brand. So brands need to think about, in a world where historically we've invested a lot of money in building largely visually led brand building, how do we win in a voice-dominated environment? So at the moment, brands are recognised through their logo, their colour palette, their end line, and a lot of visual cues. Super funds, or indeed any brand, need to be thinking about what are our audio codes, how are we going to be recognised in a voice-led world. Secondly, to Bron's point, consumer expectations are being set by categories well beyond your own. So brands can no longer look at financial services and say, how do we win in this environment? And consumers' expectations are changing incredibly rapidly. So we work with Netflix, and it's been extraordinary to see the Netflix effect on people's expectations about immediacy in terms of delivery of a product and whether they're willing to be locked into contracts. And they're the sort of things that brands need to be better understanding is what is the new normal in terms of customer expectation and how do we meet or exceed that? The third thing that's really big is historically as marketers, we've relied on screen-based marketing. So we've met our eyeballs in screens. When people are watching things, when people are searching things, we've been able to land marketing messages. And increasingly when people are interacting with voice, there's going to be a diminishing of screen time. And so we need to think about, well, how are we going to reach that audience in a world where they're not interacting with the screen? So will there be new opportunities to interrupt? Yet to be seen, probably, because these are the new media owners, your Amazons, your Googles. And secondly, voice is going to be the new search battleground. So in a world where we've gotten good at winning in search through Google AdWords or SEO, mastering the art of that new search battleground and thinking about how do we rank well in an environment where we're not being offered a brand, or to the point I was discussing with Bronwyn earlier, it's possible that category defining brands could win because I might ask for a box of Kleenex, or the reality is they've got everything to lose. It's possible that they might lose because no-name Kleenex or Amazon branded is going to pay to rank the highest and be offered as the default brand when people shop the category rather than the brand. So I think brands really need to be thinking about how are we going to win in those new battlegrounds, and are we prepared now with our audio codes and so on around our brand to win in that sort of environment. I don't know if I missed something. Why is customer-led design important? With the introduction of voice and I think chat, as you said, everyone, I think rightly guessed that they're both equally important. I don't think the two things are going to operate in isolation. The reality is introducing those technologies to either cut cost or, because it's a good fad, is not going to win. It will get in the way of the customer experience. But there are enormous opportunities to actually enhance the customer experience. And if brands can be thinking about what is the conversation that we're currently having with our audience from, through the entire customer life cycle, and how can we use these technologies to enhance their experience, deliver a better service, there's huge opportunity for upside, or even to define your brand. We work with Domino's, and one of the things we did was develop a chatbot where you could order a pizza with just a pizza emoji. And what I thought was really fascinating about that is it was very successful for them, but also it made me realise actually the Domino's brand didn't have much to do with that. It was the utility that made it a winner for customers. And actually any brand could have entered with that experience and beat Domino's. It was lucky that Domino's got there first. So thinking about from a brand perspective, I think utility and customer experience becomes more important than brand.
Very interesting. I just want to touch on a question for the panel, if anyone wants to take it, is you talked about the move from sort of, what we know as typical search today to voice search and the challenge for marketers. Is there anyone that that's doing that really well and getting up in the rankings in voice? Or is it too early to sort of...
I think In Australia, it is definitely too early. I'm not actually aware of anyone who's doing it well, although I think Amazon are winning because they created the game and they're winning the game. And Bronwyn's example is an excellent one. They're also masters of utilising the data that they have. One thing that's quite interesting is Google have so much data and they are using it, but they haven't yet managed to monetise it as effectively as I think Amazon are.
Terrific. Okay, that's fantastic. So with all that in mind, Mitch, I might turn to you and we might get into some of the technical aspects and understanding the mechanics of voice. So could you perhaps touch on, what are, for the marketers in the room and for the people in the room, what are the fundamentals of voice and how they interact with the category, the importance of understanding some of the algorithms of voice, and touching on brand salience as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think echoing a lot of the stuff that Bronwyn and the guys have said, I think it's important to think about the new battleground in search, because when we are sort of moving from, the typical type searches and those lists of long blue links that you'd normally get, it would hardly be viable if Alexa or Siri sort of read out all of those responses to you every time you had a question. So the responses all the more need to be increasingly relevant to you in the same way that a person would voice their response to you. So the battleground for brands is to be increasingly more relevant in those moments, and I guess it's the same way that brands now need to understand, if you look at any sort of Google Trends data and try and understand how people are sort of fundamentally asking questions, or what are the need states associated with your category. Are they asking for something that's nearby? Are they asking for something that's the cheapest? Whatever that might be, it's probably even more pronounced in the search environment because you've got a lot less response time from Alexa to come back with the relevant response. If they're not going to come back to you with a response that's relevant, then obviously the user experience is not going to be good, and that's not good for Google or Amazon, and people aren't going to use these devices. And as the guys have touched on, we're increasingly moving to a point where these virtual personal assistants such as Siri and Alexa are going to be ephemeral across lots of different devices and really kind of act as almost a gateway to many of our needs as they arrive across the day. So that, when we talk about algorithms first, I think the first point is understanding how do people call upon your category and the need states around that, the same as we do with search now, but really understand that in the context of voice. And then second to that is obviously, with the likes of Amazon and Google, they're going to be completely, obviously, always upgrading their algorithms to make their responses more and more relevant to the users, but trying to understand, okay, then how is the algorithm then making those decisions on people's behalf? Because as the guys have touched on, a lot of people are going to be outsourcing their decision making to an Alexa or a Siri to decide what brand of batteries, what brand of milk. Which brings on to the second point the guys have talked about, which is brand salience becomes even more important in this sort of new sort of age of voice marketing, because we're going to be completely, increasingly competing to get people to ask for a brand instead of a category. And there was a recent, I think, ad that Amazon did to sort of show how e-commerce worked with Amazon Echo. And a woman's going about her day, she's just come back from work, and she kicks over the dog bowl and she asks, okay, order more dog food because I'm out of dog food. And obviously that's deferring to a category request. So the decision making goes to Alexa and the algorithm to make a decision of which dog food that should be ordered for her. But then when it comes to laundry, she asks for Tide laundry detergent. So there clearly is an association where she's thought of a specific brand. And I think a lot of brands are going to be completely, increasingly playing in that space to be synonymous with their category and famous for that category and that need state, if you will. And I think the third one, I guess, the guys have touched on is, this sort of new age of voice branding or sonic branding, which is going to be completely different to anything we've seen before. It's hard to imagine, where jingles are going to play a role, for example, in an interactive call and response channel. I think, for instance, in the same way with a pay-per-click model and the threat that this is going to place on that, if you asked Alexa for directions to the nearest coffee shop, it wouldn't, be very useful to you every time if you did that she burst into a Starbucks commercial before she told you where the coffee shop was. So that would be, very, very frustrating. So increasingly, things like push advertising is probably going to be less relevant, but it's going to be more about how do you create branded experiences around moments when people are asking for your category, such as Alexa skills. So Amazon has opened up, obviously, brands and different third parties to create different functions within Alexa. An example I think that I've seen recently is with Campbell's Soup, or Campbell's in general, and they've sort of got a Campbell's sort of cooking tutorials function within Alexa, which obviously ties through to using any of their products, but it provides utility and usefulness to people who are using these voice services rather than trying to force traditional push advertising, which would actually sort of annoy a lot of people. So those are sort of the sort of three key areas I think it's going to be quite interesting to watch.
Terrific. And I guess we'll turn to you now, Dave, in terms of what now? Obviously, the acceleration of this kind of technology is quick. I think you mentioned, probably 12 months ago, it was pitching this to clients was a difficult thing, and now there's a flood of demand. But how can funds embrace voice? Do we have to think about this as a big bang transformation or start small? And what are some of the cultural challenges that and new ways of workings that funds or organisations will need to consider?
Look, I think it's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind, right? That is AI and bots and voice, and it can be a little bit daunting. We do have clients that come in and they're convinced they need to build their own version of Siri, essentially, and that's a scary task. Where do you start? So I guess when we work with our clients, we take a step back, we look at the business, and we try and find areas or business problems that can be solved using this technology, that can be a genuine benefit to your customers. And really with that, I think it's really a case of just starting small. So a prime example for funds would be something as simple as FAQs. There's a lot of people out there, I may be one of them, that don't understand some of the terminology or the jargon, for want of a better word. And it's a little bit embarrassing to pick up the phone and talk to someone. But I can talk to a bot, no judgment there, right? And the bot's available 24/7. So that's just a really simple use case of being there for your customers and kind of helping them out. And I think that's a good approach, starting small. Like just look at Westpac and NAB. They just launched skills for Alexa recently. You can't do end-to-end banking, right? You can do balance checks, transaction history. So it's not end-to-end banking, but they've got a presence. They're in the space. And they're getting all that data, and the data is something really that can't be overlooked. We delivered a chatbot for ING last year. Now, it wasn't anything groundbreaking from a functionality piece. It was you chat with the bot and it would tell you where your closest fee-free ATMs were, because they're about fee-free banking. The interesting thing was within 2 to 3 weeks, we had thousands upon thousands of users, customers and non, that had engaged with this bot, and now we knew the types of questions they were asking, the way they were asking those questions, and the stuff that they were happy to talk to the bot about. So this data was so valuable, because now you've got this rich data that you can use to develop a product roadmap. Where do we go next? Well, 50% of our users are asking us about home loan rates. Well, clearly we should do home loan rates. So there's a lot to be said for just getting started, because I think with this technology, holding research groups really doesn't cut it. You need to prototype, you need to build something. And you can prototype, voice apps for both Alexa and Google Home now without knowing one word of code. So there's no excuse not to start, creating something and getting it into the hands of users and see how they react. And that's how you find something that will stick. Sitting on the sidelines, you're going to wake up in 12 months and somebody else will have hit the jackpot and found that killer experience, and you'll be kicking yourself. So get started, I think, is one of the core points. You talk about cultural challenges. I think there needs to be a big change, to be honest, in the way that funds market themselves in this space if they want to be relevant. It's a conversation. It's two ways, and you need to be invited to the conversation, by the user. So you need to have something interesting to talk about, and I'm probably going to offend a lot of people in the room, but talking to a fund about all their great product features, it's not an exciting conversation, especially not to a 20-something-year-old, right? So Mitchell touched on it earlier on and used my Campbell's example. Thank you. No, but you're right. Find interesting ways to engage the user. Find ways that resonate with them and their life at whatever point they're at in that life. And it doesn't have to be about selling your product. Campbell's is a great example. You don't get to the end of every conversation with the Campbell's app and they try and sell you a can of soup, all right? They don't try and sell you anything. They're just trying to, get that engagement, get that learning, and and have a presence in the space. So I think there's a lot to be said just for getting started. So when it comes to cultural challenges, I think there's a retraining of the brain a little bit. This isn't a TV ad. It's not a, it's not a press ad. It's not even a website. It's a two-way conversation. Is that me?
No, thank you.
If I can build on that,
yes,
I think it's a really good point. You have to look at these technologies in the context of the customer journey. And the first place to start is to actually understand who your customer is. So we did a project around super, and we discovered that there were lots of different behavioural archetypes. So it wasn't about demographics or personas, it's about actually understanding the different behavioural archetypes. And we found that there were people who were super fearful about super, like they just were scared and didn't want to engage. There were those that were super disengaged, super casual, super knowledgeable, and really super engaged. And then we also found within those different types of groups, people are either positively or negatively charged around their attitude towards money and finances. And that emotion that they bring actually drives a lot of their behaviours. So if you have a sort of a negatively charged experience, for example, perhaps you had financial hardship when you were growing up, or you've just lost your job, or your parents went bankrupt or something like that, you come to your decisions around money with a very different mindset. So understanding all of these different types of archetypal people is a really important part of starting, because you have to know who you're having a conversation with. Then once you know who that, you have to think about the customer journey, and at each touch point sort of think about, okay, this better be done by a human, by a machine, or a human augmented by a machine. So it's very useful to think about these types of technologies not only for the customer experience but also for your employee experience. So chatbots can really help frontline staff in terms of giving them very quick access to data that they may not have had before, so they can spend more time engaging with the customer and less time navigating a whole bunch of systems and tools. So I think it's really important to think about both customer and an employee, but the most important thing is to start by actually understanding who your customer is at any point.
Fantastic. I just want to remind the audience also that the AXA Investment Manager Live Q&A is open, and there's some great questions that are coming through, so I encourage you to send through some questions, and I'll turn to some of them in a moment. But before I do, I might turn to you, David, if that's okay. And so one of the things I wanted to do to make my introduction a bit more fun, I was going to use Siri and say, hey Siri, can you tell the audience my name? And I was in my hotel room last night. I thought that would be an interesting way to introduce the topic that we're talking about. And she says, I can't do that capability yet. So in that context, I guess my question is, what level of maturity is voice and chat at, and how intelligent is it now, and how good do you think it's going to get?
I think you've touched on a great point. I think we're still very much in the early days. There's a lot of buzz and hype around it, but it is early days. And I use Siri much like you as the example. I've been friends with Siri for years. I've been, an iPhone advocate, and I bought some earpods just the other day that have, or AirPods, I should say, that have Siri built in. I then went for a run, and halfway through I said, Siri, turn up volume, and Siri went, I'm sorry, there's nobody called volume in your contacts. So that just shows you all the money and all the might of Apple. And they have, there's a long history of me engaging with Siri, and yet I buy a different product with Siri built in, and there's still issues with it. So absolutely, there's still work to be done. In saying that, I think we're really starting to pick up speed now. So you have all the big players, your Facebooks, your Googles, your Amazons, I can go on. They're all betting big on this, all right? There's no way it's going to fail, if I'm to be honest. You just take a look at the Consumer Electronics Show this year, biggest electronics show in the world. And literally the whole thing was about voice and automation and AI. You're talking everything from fridges and microwaves and TVs, and you name it, it has Alexa or Google Home or something built in. So this technology, whether you like it or not, is going to be in your house in the next few years. And because it's in your house and because we're using it more, there's more data, it gets refined, it will get better, And then I'd like to show a short video, if that's all right, when we talk about how good it will get. There's a company called Soul Machines. They're based in New Zealand, and they take AI and they basically put an avatar over it. Now, what you're about to see, it was a conference last year, much like this. It's not scripted, and it was a live demo. So it's just really interesting to see, this level of technology to show where we're going. If you guys wouldn't mind showing.
My current interest is helping people find the best credit card for them.
Really? I've actually been looking into credit cards recently.
What a coincidence. Really?
Yeah, but it's really overwhelming. You know, there's so many credit cards out there, so many offers, options. I don't really know what to do.
Oh, Shantanu, I completely understand. It can be a lot to figure out. Would you like some help?
Sure. I'm looking for a card with no annual fee, a low APR, and something where I can get the maximum amount of points.
Okay, so you're looking for a points card. I can definitely help. Is this for personal or business use?
Personal use.
And will it be your first card?
No, I actually have a few.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask about your credit score? An estimate could help me narrow down the options for you.
Well, I'm at this audience, but it's 750. Just keep it between you and me.
Excellent. You will have some good options. Since you said you're looking for a low APR, does that mean you typically carry a balance or that you pay it off every month?
I really try to pay it off every month.
All right. I have the perfect card in mind for you. It has no annual fee, an APR of 6.5%, and it comes with triple points on all purchases.
Oh.
How does that sound?
Sounds nice. How do I get started?
Wonderful. I can transfer you to an agent to complete the application.
Now, look, what's so interesting about this is they are not trying to fool you into thinking it's a real person. What they're trying to do is just help engage in human-like interactions, you know, and just make it as easy as possible for you just to chat in your, you know, your natural form and get a response that is really on point and personalized to you. The little lines up in the corner, that's where the AI is scanning your features, you know, listening to the tone of your voice and putting all of that together to give you a response and to kind of help you out. So this technology is not 3, 4, 5 years away. Air New Zealand, I believe, are using some of this to train their staff. So I think, you know, much like, I guess, the survey earlier on, will it be voice, will it be screen? I also think it will be both. I think we'll start to see more of this kind of stuff where screen and AI come together, and you'll start to see it on the high street and online.
The thing that scares me about this, I just had this thought, you know, having 3 young kids, when, you know, my son says, "Can I have that bar of chocolate?" I say, "No, you can't." But my virtual parent said I could. That would be a funny old day. But I'll turn to you, Suzie. I mean, I think about this, I get the example with batteries, I get the example with tissues and dog food. But are there certain categories or industries or product categories where these technologies provide a better utility or experience for? And where do you think the opportunities are for super?
Look, I think the opportunities exist for every business because they need to, because this is where the consumer is going to be and this is the interface that they're going to want to engage with. So I think firstly, there's no point saying it's all too hard for our category because I think we'll get left behind. And again, just building on what everyone said, it's really about trying to find the opportunities to enhance the customer experience. So firstly, I think if you think about, and from a marketing perspective, it's thinking about what are the challenges our business is facing that this technology could overcome. So I think it's about thinking about what are the pain points in our customers' experience at the moment, what are the barriers to moving forward in a conversation. And I think, I don't know if someone mentioned it previously, but you know, in super, there is it can be quite overwhelming because it's an information-dense category, it's quite complex information, but there is a need for people to penetrate that. And I think if you look at something like the Barefoot Investor, it's demonstrated that the Barefoot Investor is apparently at the moment the #1 selling audiobook in Australia. So I think that's demonstrated that there's an appetite for people to engage in financial information and to build their financial literacy, but it needs to be done in a kind of digestible, customer-friendly way. And I think that's the really big opportunity for super funds, is to think about how can our customers need us. That's the great thing about the category, you know, everyone's got it. But how do we, A, make the experience better, B, help build their financial literacy, C, build value. So rather than just trying to sell them something, think about, okay, well, what can we deliver that's relevant to who we are, but that our customers would value, and do it in a way that, creates more frictionlessness, because that's really the meta trend that's driving so much innovation and change today around technology, is how do we take out those pain points and those moments where customers are stopped and just make the experience more frictionless.
So customer experience is key for sure, and it seems to be a common theme. Mitch, I might turn back to you. It's not lost on me how there's a critical interplay with brand. So could you give us any advice or tips on how can brands make the consumer shortlists through the search algorithms?
Yeah, I think it goes back to obviously trying to get a sense for how people are, like we said, calling upon the category, but how that algorithm is responding as well. So, I mean, currently if we look at Amazon Echo, the algorithm seems to be quite not that sophisticated at the moment, especially around e-commerce, for instance. So, people will be calling upon things and, the brand or service that Amazon will typically recommend in response is usually something that they've got in their pre-order history, for instance, unless they specify a brand, or if they ask for, what deals do you have, which is, obviously a paid promoted space that a brand would pay to be involved in. But I think, going back to that point earlier about how these, algorithms will get increasingly more and more relevant, there'll be increasing layers of data, interplayed in, making sure the responses are relevant. So, whether it is, people asking for what's nearby, making sure that, that has effects on, how you adjust your physical availability and your distribution plan, if you're, for example, a FMCG marketer, or if, people are most concerned with price and, influencing how you drive your promotions across the year in accordance with how people are typically searching or looking at those voice search trends and when people are spiking in terms of looking for promotions and deals, for instance. So I think that sort of is, the way that, we can't really know, just like now, we don't really know the algorithms inside and out, like they will not tell us that, but we can, make a lot of assumptions based on human behavior in terms of how that algorithm's going to pull in different data levers to make sure it gets the best relevant response.
Terrific. I might turn to some of the questions from the floor. Dave, we talked about the change in culture and mindset. One of the questions here is, what skill set do we need in-house to start building to capitalise on voice? So, maybe... Look,
I think it's a real mix of skills, to be honest. It's the marketing team working with the digital team, working with the technical team. Really, I think, and the customer service team, right? So if for example, obviously to build, if you're looking to build an MVP, you may need your developers to work on that. But 2 steps back from that, I think where you need to start is looking at your customers and the type of questions they're asking for. So you're looking to the call center, you may be deflecting calls from the call center. Then you may need the marketing team to make sure that how you position that and almost how you, I guess, give your bot, or be it a voice app or be it a chatbot, how you give it a bit of personality. So what is the outwardly personality that we're going to put on these responses? And then obviously lots of research and lots of testing is hugely important. I think everything needs to be validated, especially when it comes to this space. When you're looking at super funds, there's all different type of funds with different types of members. So what sticks with one type of fund and one type of member will not stick with the other one. So your members will decide the channels that you need to be on and what platforms you should be on. So definitely, I wouldn't dare turn around and say, just Google. Go Google Assistant, get a team together and focus on Google Assistant. I think you take a step back, get a team together, understand what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then do some research, do some prototyping, and see what resonates with your customers, and make sure you're on the platforms that they're going to be on. So I guess to loop back in, it really depends on your features and functionality, but it's very much a mixed bag. There's people from all areas of the business. Don't dare think that it's a digital project, give it to the digital team because this is digital stuff. That won't work. It'll go wrong very quickly.
Okay, thank you, Dave. There's another question here that I might point to you, Bronwyn. It's you talked about the era of living services in the Fjord paper, and if you haven't got the Fjord paper, the era of living services, I recommend. It's a really good read and a really great document. But there's a question here that says, how does voice technology achieve true personalisation?
So personalisation is really about how well you know your customer. So one of the really interesting things about voice and living services is you can use the technology that we just saw in this little video here to really understand a customer. So through, not voice on its own, but voice certainly plays a big part of it. So IBM Watson's Bluemix can pick up your sentiment and the pace in which you're talking, and from that construe your emotional state. And then you have computer vision. So computers are just being put everywhere in all of our environments. You know, we've got the iPhone X, which now opens up with, facial recognition, which is like this amazing consumer tipping point where everyone's like, oh, that's okay. That's my security now, my face. So you've got computer vision everywhere. You've got sentiment tracking. You've got all sorts of things that actually allow us to really understand not only where a customer is, but who they is and what is their state of mind. And what's really interesting about the evolution of this technology, if you take it to its extreme, is you could choose as a brand to actually differentiate your brand by a multiple of 7 billion. So you can basically create a brand that is exactly like your customer. So you can know how to talk to them by talking to them exactly like they are. So, and that is a choice that you need to make. Do you actually create a service that is a reflection of each individual brand and talks to them? Or do you try and create a brand that has a particular strong brand identity, tone of voice? And what I would say is actually, if you are a boring brand, and you need to think about whether that is you or not, it might make sense to actually think about that hyper-personalization. If you're a brand that has really strong brand identity, like say Nike, for example, then it might make sense to think about maintaining a really strong presence in voice. But there's certainly a sort of a spectrum there. If you do go down the route of trying to create that really strong brand personality, what we've found in our work that we've done so far is the way to create personality in voice is through idiosyncrasies. So if you think about your sort of best friend, they have these quirks, they do unexpected things, they kind of surprise you. And it's the same with a voice brand. So if you want to create personality, you need to build in idiosyncrasies that have no actual purpose other than to create engagement with your brand. So it's those little things like, for example, if you ask Alexa to tell you a fart joke, it will say, sorry, I don't do fart jokes, but I will take the blame for you. So these lovely little things. And, in terms of some of the skills that organizations need to build, one of the things that all of these organizations are doing, like Amazon and Alexa, is actually hiring screenwriters, script writers. So writing is a critical skill. And how you can inject that personality into language is going to be very important in terms of differentiating yourself if you choose to go down that route of differentiation.
I'd love to just add to that and I guess back it up a little bit. So when you talk about the skill for conversational copywriting, so we obviously set up a business focusing on conversational marketing a few years ago, and we have digital copywriters with 10 or 15 years of digital copywriting experience, but they absolutely didn't hit the ground running when it came to conversational copywriting, because the quirks and the way that people engage is so different than other mediums that again, it's an art form in itself. So it's really interesting to, it takes time and it takes effort to really understand how people engage in a conversational manner, and it is much different than other channels you may already have in place. Mm.
So just one last thing on that point, there's something that you should all check out called Crystal Knows, with a K, Crystal Knows. And it's basically an AI that scrapes your social media and will run a report on exactly how you like to be spoken to. So you could run a report of somebody that you're going to meet, and it will tell you their conversational style, their mannerism, their personality type, and it can even get to the point of actually composing emails in the way that is most likely to cut through to that person. That's sort of where this technology is going.
Yeah, I recall, if you haven't seen it on Netflix, Black Mirror, and I recall one episode where there was a lady, to this very topic, it sounds similar, where this lady, she lost her husband in a car accident, and she's at the funeral, and a lady walks up to her and gives her a card, and all you hear her say is, when it gets tough, just call the number, it worked for me. And then in the next scene, you see this woman, she's sobbing on her bed, missing her husband, and she calls the number, and just say yes to activate the service. And what it did, it's obviously science fiction, but it trawled her husband's vocal, visual data and created a bot that she could talk to freely, and it's like he never left. So, I mean, I know it's Black Mirror, and I know it's a bit science fiction, but from what I'm hearing today, it doesn't seem too far from reality, which is a little bit exciting and also scary. So just to move on, I guess, Mitch, I'll ask a question that's come through the floor, and obviously open to any panel member. This one's from a colleague of mine, Greg Clark. Do consumers need brand, or are we merely seeking utility? And utility is what? And is it utility that's being delivered?
So do they need brand, or is utility what they're after? That's a good question. I mean, have a lot of consumers ever really needed brands, I guess? I think in a voice context specifically, I think going from everything we've talked about, it seems to lie much more heavily in utility and providing relevance and being in places and in ways that adds value to their experience and what they want to get out of that category. I think from a brand perspective, it's probably more, trying to make sure that you're still that brand that's associated with those need states, so that people do call upon you. But I think voice is just another fragmented touch point of, it's not something where we need to think of voice in its own little island, but it's another touch point across many different fragments where it's just another expectation for us to be relevant, easy to use, and accessible to people. I think I read recently there was a recent super product that launched called Zupa, and the guy who founded it obviously compared that we're not competing with other super funds for millennials, we're competing with Uber. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about the new context of all brands, in a sense, competing with the likes of Uber, for instance, in terms of being mobile, being accessible, being across all touch points, being able to find out the value of my fund, by just asking Alexa, or being able to find out, how much, my, voluntary contributions will amount for when I reach retirement age, at the simple, request of just asking my virtual personal assistant, are all kind of things I think people would get benefit from. So.
Okay, and it would be remiss of me not to ask the most popular question from the floor, and it's a really good one actually from Ashton Jones. So thank you for the question. But will people develop a bigger brand relationship with a device provider, example Google or Amazon, or the product provider, example the fund? How can funds combat this? So I think it's a distribution question. Do we go to consumer, or do we try to sell the product and services through Amazon and the platforms?
I think the market is currently answering that for us, in that you can see Amazon is one of the fastest growing stocks in the world, because I think they are, it's a land grab at the moment, and they're aggregating a lot of dominance because of their access to the customer. That doesn't mean that there isn't a role for brands and they can't win, but they do need to redefine the way that they add value to the customer and the way that they build their brand in future. I think there's a really smart futurist and economist, Scott Galloway, who's sort of looked into the future at where this is all going, and his view is, at the end of this game, Amazon wins, and then they get broken up because of non-competitiveness. Because the reality is, none of us want to live in a world that is so heavily dominated by one monopolistic company. But And I don't think that means we should all give up and go home, because I absolutely think there is a role for brands. We make a lot of decisions emotionally, and we back them up with rational reasoning, but those emotional decisions are made because of our understanding and trust of a brand, and that can be done through every way that we interact with them. And there's still, an opportunity for us to deliver a branded experience that will endear the customer to the brand. And trust is going to be super important, I think, particularly in this category.
Yeah, I would say I agree with everything Suzie just said. I think as well, a way to think about it is it's not or it's possibly and. So you have the VPAs, the voice personal assistants, but you also have your own voice interface that you can design. And it's probably going to be overlap between the functionality, and sort of part of the design process is to understand, what do you let the VPA do? What high-level kind of queries would you let it answer on your behalf? But then, if you have your own super voice interface that you can ask Alexa to open, what functionality sits in there that is deeper and richer, and how do you build the utility into it so that people will actually ask to go in and engage with your voice interface?
It's It's also interesting how the different platforms handle that. So Amazon's Alexa versus Google Home. So Google Home basically facilitates and hands off to the brand, and you can have a different voice if you want. And they make it a little bit clearer that this is my part, I'm handing you over to the brand now you're chatting to the super fund. Whereas I think Amazon are taking more of a true, virtual assistant approach, and they're end to end, and they're not being as clear, so it's a bit tougher, I think, on Amazon's platforms to really understand the clear break, like now I'm dealing with Amazon, now I'm dealing with the brand. So there are little quirks depending on the platform that should just be, you should keep an eye on.
I think that's because if you think about it, the heritage of Google is that they're a search business, and the heritage of Amazon is they're a retail business and they want to sell you stuff.
Yeah.
With the limited time left, there's some amazing questions coming through, and I apologise in advance for, with the limited time, not being able to get through them all. But there is a really good one here. As funds, we obviously, a lot of us manage large contact centre operations that we're all very familiar with. There's a really good question here. Will voice remove the need or role for call centre staff? What's your view on that?
I don't think so. I think that you will always need human escalation protocols. You'll always need a point, because at this stage, these chatbots and voice can, do very simple things. Like, for example, we've built a HR chatbot that enables employees to ask really simple questions around onboarding and benefits. And the AI can respond very quickly, but there are more complex, emotional, highly charged issues that a human is generally better to do. And I think there will always be the need for them, but I think that the value that they will add is through much more complex interactions with customers. But I think it's always machine and human, not machine only.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, they always say time flies when you're having fun, and I can't believe an hour's gone past. That, for me, was a very enjoyable conversation, a very insightful conversation, and I think all us as delegates have been very privileged to have the company of these thought leaders. So could you please join me in thanking them for their presentations today? Before I send you to lunch, I just want to announce that today's speaker gift is a donation to the First Nations Foundation. So thanks again to the panellists for that. And lunch will now take place in CMF Central, proudly supported by our premium partner, Rebecco. If you're attending the Women in Super Networking lunch, please head straight to M1 and 2 mezzanine level, where lunch will be provided. But once again, thank you, and can you please join me in thanking our panellists? Thank you.